Hello, this is National Chess Master Rats at chess.com, and I'm going to analyze a game that ChessLearner48 played. And this game will be posted in my Member Best Game thread. And Chess Learner, you've got a lot of hope ahead of you, I just wanted to say. And I'm going to basically give you an instruction on this game. I think it's better than the game you submitted, and we can help get you focused on how to improve your chess here. Okay, let's have a look at this game. Okay, I played through a number of your games, and I selected this one for a number of reasons, and we'll see why in a moment. Okay, the opening you're playing, it's known commonly as the Petrov defense, or in other parts of the world as the Russian defense or the Russian game. It's basically going to give black an equal position. White has a hard time getting any kind of advantage on it. That's what opening theory says. Now, I just want to make a sideline. One game you played, you walked into a little trap. This is something that I remember learning about when I was about 12 years old. And we actually used to spring it on people, other teenagers, even adults would fall for it. Now, the trick is black shouldn't be taking this pawn. It just runs into all kinds of trouble because this is known for hundreds of years, so to speak. The knight's in trouble here. Now, the worst thing black can do is move that knight, because when he does, white gets a discovered check, and that wins the queen. What black has to do is, and I've actually seen people play this, black has to do the same thing here and rely on a pin of his own. Okay, now if queen takes knight, now you get d6 in, and now the white knight is pinned. And there's a strong player over at another chess server that actually plays this line as black, and he gets some pretty good games out of it. He catches people by surprise. I'd have to do some research and remember who he is and what his games look like. But if, in effect, white can stay a pawn ahead here, and I think black can play f6, and we have f4. And I don't remember all the analysis here. I think maybe you can take, and like I say, you just keep the pressure on. You put the knight on d7 rather than c6 to counterattack e5, but it can run into a pin. And this is all kind of long-winded, and I don't want to confuse you with it. But for those that are interested, I can do some research. You have to contact me and tell me what's this line like. Maybe it's in the books. I don't know. If it's been played before, it's somewhere on a database. But you want to generally avoid taking that pawn on e4. What you do, let me just show you what you do. Okay, the trick here is to play d6. Okay, then and only then is the pawn safe to take, and now you take it. Okay, now white doesn't have tricks that he did in the other variation, and a discussion of this opening is pretty much beyond the scope of this video. If you use the Opening Explorer here at chess.com, you can find examples how many times certain moves are played. But a common move is to play a d5 or d4, then black plays d5, and often it goes bishop d3 and bishop e7. And notice one thing that's happening. Both sides are developing. They're getting their pieces developed, and both sides have open lines for their pieces. So whenever you play a chess game, you want to make sure that your pieces are going to find squares that they can get out to, and they're going to get out and not sit back behind. Think of chess as an actual war game, which it is. Do you want to send one or two of your army out to combat the whole other force? No, you don't. They're going to, if the other force is getting into play, they're going to overwhelm yours, and then yours that are sitting back behind, they are going to just be overwhelmed because they won't have any mobility left. They're going to be suffocated. So what I've just shown you is just a book position. It's something that they've known about for over 100 years. There have been countless games played at all rating levels from this position, and what happens from here is not important. both sides have winning chances. Okay, let's go back to the game, and I'm just gonna make a little adjustment here. I'm going to re-enter the PGN. Whenever you play a sideline on chess.com, it tends to replace the main line with the sideline, and it gets a little confusing to find things. Now, d4 is a very playable move. Okay, and I don't have all the theory on it right in front of me, but you don't need theory at your level. Okay, you really don't. What you need is just to focus on getting your pieces developed. That's what you need to focus on. If you get your pieces developed, good things can happen. So let's look at what you did, and we'll talk about it. Okay. What you played is you defended your pawn with d6. Now, before we play this, I want to comment. I noticed this game was played under the 45 time control, which is an excellent time control for the lower rated players. It's generally not up to snuff to a real live over-the-board tournament game. They play a common time control at a local club will be 40 moves in 90 minutes, and then you get 30 minutes for the rest of the game. That's a big weekend event. You might have 40 moves in 90 minutes plus a 30-second increment every move. I noticed that time control is popular with the master class. But a 45-45 game, basically, you're going to start with 45 minutes on your clock, and every time you move, you get a 45-second increment. And I've played in many of these games myself on another server in a league, highly competitive games. I personally don't like the time control. It's best for me because it's just a little too quick for me. Like I say, it's faster than what I'm accustomed to. But a game should last about 3 hours on the 45 time control, which is a good time. But I've done countless videos for players that play at this time control, and the number one killer of players is not the moves they play, it's the time they spend. You've got to spend your time on the moves. If you don't take your time, then bad things are going to happen, because the more you think, the more you sit and look, the longer you're going to look at the position, the more chances you're going to select the best move. So unfortunately, chess.com doesn't have a timestamp for the games, so I can't say if you rushed a move or not. I don't have a record of that. I can just judge the moves on what I say, but you'll know when you're playing a game what time you're spending, and the same, you'll be able to see your opponent's time as it's ticking down. So I think the main line here is to take the pawn on d4, but I'm not familiar with all the analysis, and that's beyond the scope of the video. What I want to discuss is what you played. Okay, so let's talk about the move d6. Is it good or bad? Well, let's look at it this way. Black is happy with an equal game, because that's what happens when you're playing black. You start with an even game. For black to win, you've got to equalize the position, get your pieces out, and then try to outplay your opponent. Naturally, a blunder will offset things nicely for you, but the objective with black is at least to have an equal game. And d6 may not be the best move, but it's not a move that white can look at that and say, I win. Okay? Question is, how can white try to improve his, well, I guess it's a lady in this case, how can white try to improve her position? Well, the way that I teach is I want you to consider what we call candidate moves. And a candidate is just like someone running for office. He's a candidate for election. In this case, a candidate move is a move for your selection. So let's back up one moment and consider candidate moves. And I'm not going to analyze them necessarily. Knight takes is probably reasonable. Pawn takes, I think, is main line. You could even play knight c6 here, probably get away with it, but it might be a little tricky because white is threatening to take on e5. But what you play is safe and sound. It does have one drawback, though. It's shutting in the diagonal of this bishop. You've restricted a piece that did have an open and free diagonal. Okay, so it's okay that you did, but you want to be thinking of these things when you make a move. Am I shedding a piece in? Am I helping my development? You want to kind of ask yourself some of these questions, and also, you have to realize that you're not entirely guarding the square e5. White has 2 attackers on it. We can count them up, and he didn't take it. White didn't take it last move, but can take it this move. You've only put 1 defender on it. But let's have a look for the sake of argument and see if White can now take advantage of that, yes or no. And this is the kind of line of thinking I want you to think about when you play a game. I want you to learn to analyze, and that's one thing I do, is I teach you how to analyze. And the simplest way to learn to analyze is look at a couple of variations, and when I do it, I always select aggressive and developing moves, because there's no point analyzing a move like pawn here, okay, or pawn here. These do very little to help the white position. We want to analyze forcing moves, okay, and pawn takes is a forcing move. Now let's talk about this move for a moment, okay? See what happens. You have to do one of 2 things. You have to take this pawn, or you have to take this pawn. Otherwise, you're going to lose a pawn. Now, both are interesting. Let's just have a quick look and see what we come up with. Okay, if you take back with the pawn, now White has the option of taking away your privilege to castle. That might be a plus, it might not. But in this case, it might be a plus because suddenly White's able to take this pawn on e5 with the knight, and now there's a new threat, taking another pawn and forking the king and the rook. So it seems like maybe White had a very good move in that position. Okay, but we're not done yet. Let's finish analyzing this. Okay, now Black probably needs to protect that f7 square. You can bring the king back over, but let's just develop a piece. Like I say, whenever I analyze something out, I like to develop whenever possible, because that will create more potential. Now, if White wants, White can play f3, and you've just lost a pawn. Okay, and that in itself, we've examined this candidate move, this selection, and we can put this position in our, take a little photograph, have it in our mind, and say, do we want to play this position a pawn down? Well, we don't know yet. We have to go back and examine some other candidate moves. Okay, and the other candidate move after pawn takes was that you take with the knight. Now, this has some new wrinkles to it. How does White exploit this, or can White exploit this? Now, for instance, if White takes this pawn, Black, if Black so chooses, can simply bring the knight back and retake with the knight. Now the game looks very, very symmetrical. The only difference are these 2 knights. That's the only difference. Both sides have traded their center pawns. Both sides have not weakened their remaining pawns. They're all on their original squares, and development will continue. In this case, I would say that Black is equalized, and all White has is what we call the advantage of the first move. In other words, White moves first, White gets a piece in play, then Black's turn, and so forth. So the question is, can White improve on this position? Well, one thing, since we know Black is not going to lose a pawn in this line, White can try other things. He can try to exploit the fact that this knight is on this square. Is it possible to do that? Let's have a look. The most aggressive move that I can find is to attack it with the queen. Now we have a couple squares, d4 and d5. I think d5 is a better square to attack that knight with, simply because there's some possibilities of a follow-up attack on f7. Okay? Now, Black needs to react here. The knight's under attack. So we've got to recognize that the knight's under attack and deal with it. And we have to be very careful. There's ways to go wrong in a hurry. One move, which is playable in some positions, but not this one, is f5. That supports the knight. And what Black is saying, okay, fine, if you take en passant, I'll take back with my knight, and I'll chase your queen out of there. Well, white doesn't have to be so cooperative. White can start playing aggressively here. This threatens a mate in 1 and requires black's immediate attention. You need to get the queen to something to guard this f7 square. This knight's not going to do it. It's going to be lost. So this queen has to come up to one of these 2 squares. And e7 may run into another tempo with bishop g5, and suddenly this game gets nightmarish in a hurry for black. So you've got to be careful in this position. Okay, you've got to be careful in this position. And since the knight's attacked, maybe you can't really protect it with your bishop, because then b7 is going to fall. So you might have to move this knight another time. Okay, now this is not a bad move. Okay, it's now you've got some threats. Your threat is to chase the queen out and develop a piece. Okay, that's the threat. And this knight on c5 is doing the duty of securing this b7 square so the queen can't take it. So it's possible that queen d5 was premature and that white can't exploit this position. So your opponent did not go into this line, but you have to be ready if they do. And this is what we call preparing analysis. In other words, you look at variations. You can take the ones out of the book, and they're long and they're complicated, and you really have to know them. I try to get players that are learning openings not to play too many book lines, simply because of the myriad of variations that are presented in front of you. It's just overwhelming. Plus, there's a lot of known tricks and traps that people have fallen into for hundreds of years. Okay, there's whole collections of games where people lose games very quickly simply because they walked into a trap. So how do we avoid having to run into this nightmare again? Well, you learn to play the Petrov kind of like the way I showed you, and you just basically learn the basics. Okay, but this position was playable for you, but you have to stop and think and analyze. And even if you can't see it all when you're playing, you start developing your chess knowledge by analyzing the game, and that's what I'm doing for you now. I'm showing you how I would, if I had your position, how would I tear this apart? How would I try to find improvements? And the suggestions I make get you to put your thinking cap on. I explain the ideas behind them. Most of them are devoted to one thing: development. Because when your pieces get out, good things happen. When they don't get out, good things are less likely to happen, and it's just as likely that something bad is going to happen. Okay, so your opponent did not take on d4. Your opponent came up with an interesting... See what I mean? When you play a sideline, it replaces it as the main line. Now your opponent played c3. Okay, so let's think about this for a second. What you played here? It's not a bad move, but is it the best move? And is there a way we can teach you to play just a little bit better? Now, you have a pawn sitting there on e4. You can take a pawn. And the way I used to play when I was new to tournament chess is I would try to win a pawn as soon as I could. Then I would try to trade everything down to an ending, because I knew that if I got into a king and pawn ending, I would win. Well, it wasn't that simple. Often I would grab pawns at great expense, and I would be quickly punished for lack of development. So materialism always doesn't count. You're only on the fourth move. You don't need to try to win a pawn right now. What you need to do is to do the one principle that I stress, and that's develop. Okay? You've got two bishops, a knight on the back rank. They need to get out. You've got a queen on the back rank. It needs to get up. Your king needs to castle, so your rooks are connected. So let's consider for a moment we have a threat on the e5 square. Let's deal with it. How do we deal with it? Well, There's two ways. Okay, let's talk about it. Two candidate moves to defend that pawn and develop at the same time. Let's make it simple. Instead of looking for counterplay, let's consider the move bishop g4. What does that do? Well, it pins this knight. This knight is no longer attacking e5. Now, it's possible if you play this move, you might have to surrender the bishop pair. What they tell you at your level is that bishops are worth, or any level, is bishops are worth more than knights. Well, I actually have a preference for knights, but I recognize when a bishop is better. But you have to be willing to part with that bishop. White could play bishop h3 and start renewing the threats on e5, in which case you'd have to liquidate. But then again, not necessarily. White could also seriously weaken her position, chasing that material. Now you got a counterattack on e4. So bishop g4 is a perfectly good move. It pins this knight, and it's a common theme when white breaks with d4 to do this. Okay, so and it might be the best move. Now there's two other possible ways to do it. One is knight d7. And there's a lot of positions. There's an opening called the Philidor's defense, which this could transpose into. And there's a lot of openings where black does this and puts the knight on d7. Even though it blocks this bishop in, it has a purpose. If white takes, here I'll show you the purpose. If white takes, black doesn't take back with the knight and allow a queen exchange on d8. Black takes back with the pawn and maintains a strong point on this square that white can't attack. Okay, that's the basic logic of this. And then what will happen is both sides will develop their pieces. I'll just show you a possible line. Now you need to get this bishop out. A common square in the Philidor type positions is to put it on e7, although c5 is probably okay. I'm just showing one line. Now you're ready to meet the threat of knight g5 by castling. So white simply castles, and black castles, and maybe white develops a piece, maybe, and then you get ready to continue your development. This provides a safe haven for the queen. It helps secure e5, so that this knight can be free to move and not have to worry about this pawn being taken. That's the basic idea. This queen on c7 is get rid of that arrow. This queen on c7 is pretty safe because of this pawn on c6. This pawn on c6 is keeping a white knight out of both b5 and d5. This is a square that white would like to go after, occupy with a knight. They're great squares to have for knights, but this pawn on c6 is keeping white out of there. So it's a case where you want to move a pawn one square rather than two. Some people would say, well, isn't c5 better? It's advancing two squares. Well, then white has control of b5 and d5, and it's not his knight can often get to one or both of them. It's a little harder for white with his pawn on c3, but he will get a knight to d5 eventually. Okay, so c6 is a very useful square. And the other possibility, just to give you an idea about how we analyze the chess position, the other possibility is to guard the pawn like this, and this leads to a couple of interesting things. Here, if pawn takes, you now take back with the pawn, and if white does a queen trade, you take back with the knight. Now you haven't lost castling privileges. Okay, yeah, your knight's a little awkward. Oh wait, you've given up this pawn. No, you haven't, because you're going to get this pawn back in return. Okay, sorry. So knight takes, and if white tries to generate anything, black has adequate resources. f7 is covered by the knight and the king, and then black just gains a tempo, chases that bishop out of there, and black's got a full and easy equality here. Okay. The other choice that white has, the game takes on an entirely different thread, and that's to push this pawn to d5. Now, I generally recommend white players don't do this because this kind of helps black along with what he wants to do. and it locks up the center. There's no tension there anymore. Tension being when there's potential pawn captures. Okay, so now the positional idea here is this knight's going to e7. Now black's not ready to yet. He's got to finish his development. But eventually, black is going to be attacking the white pawn chain with f5. Not yet, but eventually. And notice the white squared bishop doesn't have a great deal of mobility here. So it's just one possible line. It's not the only line. Let's just play some developing moves, give you an idea of what you do here. Okay, you can play knight g6, castle. You can even put this bishop on g7 with a fianchetto, and it can transpose into a king's Indian. But I'm just showing the basic ideas. There's so many different lines. I'm just developing pieces. And then here we have it. Black has f5, and he's trying to open up the position so that black can attack on the king side. And this game is dynamically equal, but you're following through with some principles. Notice how you're coordinated. You're securing f5 so you can get away with playing it, so that white can't go steal a pawn from you. Okay, and if white doesn't take, you may push by and then get these other pawns off and rolling and get a wonderful kingside attack. Okay, so there's all kinds of potential, and you're learning one position at a time. You learn an idea here, you learn an idea there, and even though you're not in the exact same position the next time you play a game, maybe you say, hey, you know what? There was a line that I remember looking at where that was the plan of strategy. Now I've got a strategy. So you just kind of remember these things and play over this video again. All these little concepts will stick with you. And so here we've just played a few moves, and you're learning a lot about how to open up a chess game. Okay, you're learning a lot of different plans, and we're seeing some that work and some that don't. But black's got plenty of chances here. Well, so does white. I'm playing myself here, right? I'm conducting the moves, but I'm showing you that you have a very playable game, and we'll go from there. Okay, so let's back up to what you did play, and went too far back. c3. You went ahead and took this pawn. Now, again, it's not a bad move, but it doesn't help your development. You're moving a piece a second time. So what does white do? Well, I have to replace the PGN. It's being difficult. 1 second. I can't find the main line easily enough. Okay, so let's get it in there. Okay, there we got it. So you took the pawn. Let's see how white replies. White attacks your knight. Now, notice what's happened. You retreat your knight because it's under attack. And now white castles. Now, you've won a pawn, but look at the development white has. White's castled. White's got a knight and a bishop out. You only have a knight out. Yes, you won a pawn, but white's doing fine here. Now, does white have enough compensation for it? What they say is a pawn is worth 3 tempos, and white doesn't have 3 tempos here. But your game is a little difficult simply because you're behind in development. And the threat on e5 is back. White's threatening to win that pawn and then regain his material or her material and have more development. So you've got to cover things. And what you do is fine. Okay, you pin the knight. Now the knight, you're developing a piece, and you're protecting e5. Now bishop e2, resuming the threat. There's a threat on e5 again. And here's where you kind of start to lose the threat of the position. You make what we call an unforced error. There's no need to give up the bishop pair at this time. What you need to do is develop. You need to cover e4. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend e4, but it may not be a bad move. Simply because it's attacking this knight, and but it might not be a bad move. The moves I want you to consider most are developing moves. Knight c6 or knight bd7. This helps batten down the hatches for all the other reasons I've already given. But let's just take a quick look at e4. It's a forcing move. It makes a threat. What can white do? Well, let's play the most aggressive move I can find, and that's knight g5. But here you're trying to hang on to a pawn, and you have to be careful. Okay? The threat is to take this pawn back. If you try to save that pawn, you may get in trouble. Okay? Like for instance, if you play d5, there's this queen b5 check attacking b7. So the best thing to do is just return the pawn. Let white take time to collect it back, and then further your development. Okay, now here you've given back the pawn. So a lot of times when you're pawn up, you want to give a pawn back. Return it just simply because it accomplishes for you what you need to do the most. Get your pieces in the game, get developed. And I would say returning the pawn here has made this position very, very equal. So what you did was okay. It's not going to cost you the game, but you had better. And there's nothing wrong with e4. There's nothing wrong with knight bd7, and there's nothing wrong with knight c6. Each one's an improvement. And all that's wrong with bishop takes f3 is it gives you a few more headaches that you're going to have to solve. Okay, and we'll see what they are. Okay, so now one thing that's loose, both sides miss it. You've activated, by making that exchange, you've activated the white piece. Now there's a general rule. I don't have a good example here. Let me see if I do. There's a general rule that I can tell you right here. When you make exchanges, you want to remember this rule, and I quote it in a lot of my videos. When you make exchanges, you want to make exchanges that develop your pieces. You don't want to make exchanges that develop your opponent's pieces. And one thing this bishop move does is it develops this bishop. Now there's always going to be an exception. There almost always is. But we want to drill in your mind, you want to get this rule in your head that if I'm making an exchange, am I developing my opponent's piece? And if you are, you can say, let me find a better move. What's a better move? Well, I need to cover e5. He's threatening it. That's a better move. Okay. So if you can get in that mindset that you don't want to make an exchange if it improves the position of your opponent's pieces, you'll save yourself a lot of bad positions. And it's harder to defend a bad position than it is to defend an equal position. So sometimes, we kind of dig our own grave, so to speak. I mean, don't feel bad. I had some horrible games when I was new and starting out. I had to learn. I didn't have anybody to coach me. I didn't have one to point out, Bill, what you're doing is wrong. You're developing your opponent's pieces and putting them into play. I had to, what went wrong there? That's such a good game. Well, I look back at it now and I say, oh, simple. I developed my opponent's pieces, trying to trade things off to get that winning ending. I just developed my opponent's pieces. Okay, so let's have a look at this. And like I say, there's this new problem down here, and both of you miss it. Okay, there's free material. You've got to learn to think, what is my opponent threatening? And there's this open diagonal, and so got to get your board vision improved a little bit here. Don't worry, it's easy. And white just ignores it. Ignores the pawn winning some material. But now white decides to take it. Okay? And now you need to save your rook. Okay? And then the bishop retreats. Castles. Now this next move by white's kind of peculiar because it locks the position up. I talked about a closed center. Now look at that white bishop. It's not getting into play anytime soon. All right, it doesn't have a lot of activity. Well, I can go back to a4 and then to c2, but yeah, it just seems it seems kind of odd that white would play this. Now, notice one problem with the white game: all these pieces are sitting there undeveloped. So white's accommodating you, and you're not down any material. You're actually better developed. So you've given up a pawn. It's okay. You didn't see it coming. Well, fine. But it's time for a plan of action. Okay, how do you continue in this position? And I'm going to attempt to answer it the best way I can. Okay, the move you play actually exposes a piece to danger. So let's look at what you play, then we'll come back and see if we can improve on this any. Let's go forward. Okay. So now there's a threat of bishop taking your rook. So as soon as white did this, you should have seen that there's a threat and said, "Oh my God! I put the rook where my opponent can develop a piece with tempo." So it's one of the reasons why they tell you not to develop your queen too early, because it's a valuable piece, and often it's going to get attacked by a minor piece, which is developing, which lets the other side, your opponent, get even more quicker developed. Well, it's one reason why we hold our rooks back, too, because they can get attacked like this. Now, there's positions where we bring our rooks out early, but it's better. A better use of rooks is when they're connected. In other words, let's back up, and here they're connected. The only difference is this queen's in the way, and the queen can't get out. Yet it can in time. The queen's either going to have to move to c8 so it can get out to a6, or this knight, most likely this knight, is going to have to move, and well, then the queen can't get to d7 either. So black's got a little maneuvering to do here. Okay, but it can be done. We'll come back to this and suggest a plan of action. But you see, on knight e4, you're running into two problems, okay, in one shot. Number one, you fail to realize your rook's under attack, and that's more valuable. But second, this e4 square now falls under fire. Okay, you retake the bishop, and now the knight falls. And unfortunately, you're down a rook. Okay, at this point, you're down a rook, and when you're down heavy material, there's really no hope, and unless you get lucky, unless you have some compensation, and unfortunately, you don't have any compensation. So, looking at the rest of the game, I mean, it's really kind of doesn't matter much. Okay, maybe we'll find better moves. But it's kind of like a waste of your time. You're down heavy material. I'll just kind of run through it. You're able to attack things, but you know you just don't have enough here. That rook you're down is gonna tell sooner than later, and there's just really no hope here for black. And now white ignores the queen exchange, but you know you're going into an ending down a whole rook. You know, it's just basically hopeless, and I can't really offer many suggestions here because it's just down too much material. The suggestions I can offer is when the game's equal, and your objective is to keep it equal. So let's go back to that position where white played d5 and try and do something. You know, one thing I usually do is play these from the side of the you're on, and I failed to do it here. I apologize. I'm flipping it now, but you can still learn from it there. Okay, what can black do here? Material's even, and black's ahead in development. Black's got 3 minor pieces out and castled. Okay, you need some breathing room. Okay, the best plan of action I can see is to expand on the king side. Now, how do we do that? Well, we're going to do a retreating move. Here's the idea. At knight e8. Now, how do I find knight e8? Well, it's pretty easy. I'll show you why. This knight can't go to h5, It can't go to G4. It can't go to E4. It's going to get captured on all of those squares. It can take on D5, but it's going to be lost. It can't go to D7, and it can't go to H7, and it can't go to G8 unless we stop and move the king. So that leaves knight E8. And why did I move the knight? Well, I'll tell you why. I always was discussing it's kind of hard to get this queen into play, but we're going to get there. We have to start with this knight. So knight E8. Now, how does white continue? Well, white has many ways to continue. The way I do it is I develop something for white. So here we go. Let's develop a piece for white. Now, we're going to play F5. Okay, you'll see why. We're getting some space. Now we've got a threat. We're going to chase that bishop. Well, we might not. And I'll show you why we might not in a moment. Let's suppose white doesn't want that bishop to have to back up. So let's suppose white plays F3. I'm not saying it's a good move or a bad move, but I want to teach you something else here. We don't want to just kick that bishop right now. These pawns are doing a great job covering 4 squares deep in enemy territory. Okay? We don't want to yield this valuable square to white. In other words, if we play F4, the bishop will retreat, and 2 moves later, white's got a wonderful square for his knight. Okay? We don't want that. We don't want that at all. We want to restrict our opponent's options. So we're just going to so now we're going to continue with our development. How do we do that? Well, as I said, we got to get our queen into play. And I like to keep my pieces on the board when I can. I don't like to make trades because I figure I can do more with my pieces than you can do with yours. That's my logic. So I'm going to play bishop F6 here. And why did I do that? You'll see in a moment. I did it so that my queen can come to E7. Now I've almost got the rooks connected. So let's develop something for white. Let's put this rook here. Now I'm going to play a nice, quiet, slow move, G6. Now what's white do? Let's develop, okay? We're just testing lines, just testing ideas. And now, voila, I've got my rooks connected. Just like that. Oh, there's a pawn hanging over here, okay? We could have dealt with that. Don't worry about the pawn losing, the pawn being loose. We could have stopped and dealt with that. I'm just trying to illustrate a principle. But look what I've done for your game, okay? What I've done for your game is I've got your pieces developed. I've got your pieces finding some scope. Now you have all kinds of potential. To avoid that pawn being in trouble, we might have had to play knight B6. But c'est la vie. It's not that important. I'm just kind of showing you that it's easy to find ways to get your pieces coordinated. You just look for squares they can go to. And if you can't go to any, you start creating squares by shuffling them around. And that's exactly what I did. Okay? So chess has infinite possibilities. But as long as you develop your pieces and get them out, good things are going to happen. Okay? So, I think I could do a better job with this video than I could with the game you submitted. And I picked this one because I certainly filled up over 40 minutes of discussion. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to look at this, and I look forward to making another video for everyone soon. Take care.